My name is Sophie. I am 26 years old, and I used to believe that love could bridge any gap between two worlds. But then I met Marcus's mother, and she told me my blood was dirty and unworthy. Now, sitting in this quiet mansion, I realize that the most expensive homes are often the loneliest, and I am a home caregiver. For most of my life, I have taken care of people who are old and sick. To me, this is not just a job. It is a way to share my heart with those who have no one else. But in this house, the house of the Thorne family, my heart was never welcome. I was sitting in a large, beautiful room. The walls were tall, and the furniture was made of dark, expensive wood. Outside, the garden was full of perfect roses. But inside, everything felt like ice. I was sitting next to Marcus's grandfather. He was very old and had been in bed for a long time. He was a kind man, but he was trapped in a body that did not work anymore. I held his wrinkled hand. It was soft and thin, like old paper. I felt a quiet peace when I was with him. Even though he could not speak, his eyes told me many stories. I felt a deep connection to him. I whispered to myself, "Don't worry, I am here. You are not alone." At that moment, I felt like I belonged. I felt like I was doing something important. Then, I heard a sound. Click, clack, click, clack. It was the cold, sharp sound of heels on the marble floor. I knew that sound. It was the sound of Marcus's mother, Mrs. Evelyn. I felt my stomach tighten. My heart started to beat faster, and my hands were shaking slightly. I knew she was standing just outside the door. Mrs. Evelyn did not come in to see her father. She never came in to say hello. She only stood there to watch me. I knew she was looking at my simple uniform. I knew she was thinking about my past. I am an orphan. I grew up in a small, crowded home with no parents. I never had a mother to kiss me goodnight. In this mansion, Mrs. Evelyn made sure I remembered that every day. To her, I was just a girl from the streets. She called me a gold digger who was trying to climb too high. I thought about Marcus, her son. He was so different from her. He was gentle and kind. But I also felt a deep sadness. I knew he was afraid of his mother. I knew he was too weak to protect me from her cruel words. I whispered to myself, "Is love really enough to survive this?" I took a deep sigh and looked at the old man one more time. He looked back at me with pity. He knew the secrets of this house. He knew the darkness behind the gold and the silver. I didn't know it then, but my life was about to change. I didn't know that the blood in my veins would one day be the only thing keeping this family together. I didn't know that the girl they hated would be the only person who could save them from their own shadows. I remember the first time Marcus truly saw me. I was in his grandfather's room, gently cleaning the old man's hands with a warm cloth. I didn't notice Marcus at first. He was standing by the door, quietly watching me. He later told me that he fell in love with me at that very moment. He saw my patience and my care. He told me he knew right then that I was the woman he wanted to marry. We started talking more every day. Soon, we grew very close. We began dating, but it was a secret. We hid our love from everyone like a precious treasure. One sunny afternoon, I was with his grandfather in the rose garden. Marcus came to find me. He was smiling brightly. He gave me a small wildflower he found in the field. "This is as beautiful as you, Sophie," he said softly. I felt my heart dance with joy. But suddenly, we heard a car engine. I knew it was his mother, Mrs. Evelyn. I saw Marcus's face go pale instantly. He quickly hid the flower behind his back. I felt a sudden coldness. I thought to myself, why is he so afraid of her? His grandfather saw everything. That night, the old man reached out and grabbed my hand. He looked into my eyes with a serious expression. He whispered to me, "Evelyn is not a bad person, Sophie. She is just a woman who is terrified of being poor. Do not let her anger stain your beautiful heart." I felt a deep warmth in my soul. Then, He slowly pulled an old, silver ring from under his pillow. He put it in my palm. "I have nothing else to give," he said. "This is to thank you for your kindness and your spirit." I felt so grateful. I knew this was a special secret between us. But the peace did not last long. Mrs. Evelyn arrived. She walked past me, holding a silk scarf over her nose. She looked at me like I was a piece of trash. She acted like I carried the smell of poverty into her perfect home. In front of the other servants, she screamed at me, "You are a gold digger. You are just a girl from the streets trying to climb too high." I felt my face turn bright red with shame. I looked at Marcus, hoping he would protect me. "Mother, please don't speak to her like that," Marcus said, but his voice was very quiet and weak. Mrs. Evelyn turned and yelled at him, telling him to be silent. Marcus did not stand up for me. Instead, he stepped back. He stood behind his mother's shoulder like a small child. He looked down at his shoes and avoided my eyes completely. My heart felt heavy like a stone. I felt so humiliated and small. I whispered to myself, "I am all alone in this big house." I knew Marcus loved me, but I also knew he was too weak to show it. I took a deep sigh and walked away, feeling the weight of the silver ring in my pocket. It was the only thing that gave me the strength to stay. A few days later, the atmosphere in the mansion changed. Mrs. Evelyn brought a special guest to the house. Her name was Chloe. She was the daughter of a very wealthy business partner, Mrs. Evelyn wanted Marcus to marry her to help the family business. Chloe arrived wearing a bright silk dress that looked like it cost a fortune. She walked with her head held high, looking at the furniture as if she already owned it. Mrs. Evelyn called me into the living room to serve tea. I felt my heart sink as I entered the room. Marcus was sitting on the sofa, but he looked like he wanted to disappear. I walked over and offered a cup of tea to Chloe. She didn't look at the tea. She looked at my uniform and then at my hands with a look of disgust. She took out a small silk tissue and wiped her fingers. "I don't think I want anything from someone like this," Chloe said, her voice cold and sharp. "Mrs." Evelyn laughed softly. "Don't mind her, Chloe. She is just the help. She doesn't understand our world." I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to say something. I wanted him to tell them that I was his girlfriend, not just the help, but he stayed silent. He stared at the floor, his face red with shame. I knew he was too afraid to speak. My hands started shaking, and the tea in the cups moved slightly. I thought to myself, does he even care about my feelings? I lowered my head and walked out of the room. Later that evening, I was in the kitchen alone, cleaning the counter. Suddenly, I felt a pair of hands on my waist. It was Marcus. He had sneaked into the kitchen while his mother was in the garden. "I am so sorry about today, Sophie," he whispered in my ear. "I love you. Please be patient with me. I will talk to her soon. I promise." For a moment, I felt a little hope. I wanted to believe his promise. But then, I remembered the way he looked at the floor earlier. I realized that our love was a secret. It was a love that lived in the dark corners of the kitchen and the quiet hallways at night. He didn't have the courage to stand up for me in the light. I looked at him and smiled. But it was a sad smile. I knew that Marcus was too spineless to fight for us. I whispered to myself, how long can I live like this? The following weekend, Mrs. Evelyn organized a big dinner party. She made me wear a black servant's apron. She wanted everyone to see that I was low class. The house was full of rich people in expensive suits and diamonds. I was walking through the room with a tray of red wine, trying to stay invisible. Chloe was there, standing in the middle of a group of friends. She was laughing loudly. As I tried to walk past her, she suddenly moved her foot. I tripped. The red wine splashed everywhere. It went all over my uniform and all over Chloe's white designer dress. The room went silent. Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs. "You stupid girl! Look at what you did. You ruined my dress." She looked at me with pure hate. Mrs. Evelyn rushed over. Her face was full of rage. "You are so clumsy," she yelled. "Go to your room right now. You are a disgrace." I felt my shoulders shaking with resentment. I looked around the room. Everyone was staring at me like I was a criminal. I looked at Marcus. He was standing near the window. He looked at me for 1 second. Then he turned his head away. He didn't come to help me. He didn't say a word. I thought my heart was going to stop. I dropped the tray and ran to the bathroom. Tears ran down my face as I locked the door. I cried until my chest hurt. I felt so small and worthless. After the guests left, I went to the grandfather's room. I sat on the floor by his bed and cried quietly. The old man reached out with his thin, weak hand. He couldn't speak well, but he touched my hand and then pointed to my heart. "Strong, here," he whispered. It took all his energy to say those 2 words. He held my hand tightly for a long time. I felt a quiet peace coming over me. I knew he was right. My value was not in the clothes I wore or the money I had. My value was in my heart and my devotion. I took a deep sigh. I realized I was stronger than any of them. I didn't need Marcus to protect me. I could protect myself. That night, the mansion was very quiet. The only sound was the wind outside. But at 2 a.m., the phone rang. It was a loud, terrifying sound. I knew something bad had happened. I heard Marcus running in the hallway, his footsteps heavy and fast. I opened my door and saw him. His face was white as a ghost. "Sophie, it's my father," he cried. "He had a terrible accident. We have to go to the hospital." The air in the house felt heavy. I whispered to myself, "Something is about to change forever." I grabbed my coat and followed Marcus into the night. My heart was beating fast, and I had no idea that this tragedy would be the moment the truth finally came to light. The hospital was cold and bright. The smell of disinfectant was everywhere. I felt a heavy weight in my chest as we waited in the long hallway. The doctor finally came out. He looked very tired and worried. I knew the news was not good. "He is in critical condition," the doctor said. "He has lost too much blood. He needs a transfusion right now to survive, but his blood type is AB negative. It is extremely rare, and our blood bank is empty." At that moment, Mrs. Evelyn's knees gave out. She fell to the floor and grabbed the doctor's coat. Her hands were shaking violently, and her face was as pale as a ghost. She began to scream and cry. "Save him, please. I will give you all my money. Just save my husband." I thought about how money could not buy life at this moment. All her wealth meant nothing. Marcus stood there, frozen like a statue. He did not move to help his mother. He just stared at the white walls. I whispered to myself, "This family is falling apart." I felt my own pulse beating fast in my neck. I knew a secret about myself. I was an orphan, but I had a medical card from my father. I took a deep sigh to find my courage. The hallway felt very quiet for a few seconds. I knew what I had to do. I stepped forward into the bright light of the hallway. Mrs. Evelyn looked up at me from the floor. Her eyes were red and full of tears. I felt her shock when I stood in front of her. For the first time, she had to look up at me. "Doctor," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Test me. I have that blood. I am the one you call dirty, but I am the only one who can save him." The silence in the room was heavy. Everyone stared at me. Mrs. Evelyn stopped crying, her mouth open in surprise. I felt a strange power in that silence. I knew that from this second, everything in this house would change forever. I waited for their answer, but the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. I thought about the irony of life. The blood she hated was now the only thing she prayed for. I was lying on the cold hospital bed. The room was very white and smelled strongly of medicine. I watched the dark red blood moving slowly through the plastic tube. It was a strange sight. My blood, the blood Mrs. Evelyn called dirty, was now going to save her husband's life. I felt a quiet peace in my heart. As I looked through the glass window, I saw Mrs. Evelyn. She was watching the machine, but she did not look at me. I thought about my own life as an orphan. I whispered to myself, I know what it's like to grow up without a family. I don't want Marcus to feel that pain. My blood can help, and that's all that matters right now. I knew that even if she hated me, I had to be the better person. The process took a long time. When it was finally over, I felt incredibly weak. My arm was cold, and my vision was a little blurry. I took a deep sigh and tried to stand up. The floor seemed to move under my feet. I walked slowly out of the room, leaning against the wall for support. Mrs. Evelyn was standing in the hallway. She saw me. I waited for a small smile or a thank you, but she did not say a word. She just turned her face away and walked into her husband's room. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was not from the needle. It was from her cold heart. I thought to myself, will I always be nothing to this family? Then I saw Marcus. He was standing near the door. His eyes were red, and he looked at me with deep sadness. I felt a tiny spark of hope. I moved toward him, my hands reaching out. But Marcus did not move. He looked at his mother's back, and then he looked at me. He stepped back into the shadows. He did not come to hug me. He did not even touch my hand. He was still too afraid to protect our love. At that moment, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. Tears ran down my face, and I could not stop them. I felt completely shattered. I felt like my heart was broken into 1,000 pieces. I had given everything I had to save his father, but I was still alone. I felt so small in that big white hallway. I realized that my love was not enough to change a weak man. I leaned my head against the cold wall and closed my eyes. For a long time, there was only silence. I was a hero to his family, but I was a ghost to the man I loved. I realized then that some people will never see your light, no matter how much you shine for them. Marcus's father eventually woke up. It was a miracle, and the doctors said my blood saved his life. But as the father grew stronger, Mrs. Evelyn grew weaker. The stress of the accident and the pressure of the family company were too much for her. One afternoon, she collapsed on the cold marble floor of the hallway. She was rushed to the hospital and then sent home for a long period of bed rest. I stayed in the mansion to continue caring for the grandfather, but the atmosphere changed. The house felt dark and gloomy. I felt a heavy silence in every room. Mrs. Evelyn was now the patient, trapped in her large, expensive bed. I thought she would be surrounded by friends, but the house was very quiet. Chloe came to visit a few times. She always brought huge bouquets of expensive lilies and wore designer clothes, but she never stayed long. One afternoon, I watched from the hallway. Chloe stood at the very edge of the room, far away from the bed. She held a silk handkerchief over her nose with a look of disgust. I saw her eyes move quickly to the door, as if she wanted to run away. "Oh, Evelyn, you look so tired," Chloe said. She didn't ask if Mrs. Evelyn was in pain. She didn't ask if she needed water. Instead, Chloe spent 20 minutes talking about a new fashion show and her upcoming trip to Italy. When the nurse arrived to change the medicine, Chloe turned her head away. She acted like the smell of illness was a crime. I knew right then that Chloe did not care. I whispered to myself, she loves the mansion, but she hates the people inside it. When Chloe left, she didn't even say goodbye to the servants. She just disappeared in her shiny car. Mrs. Evelyn became a very difficult patient. She was angry and bitter about her weakness. She started a war with everyone who tried to help her. In just 1 week, she fired 3 professional caregivers. I heard her screaming from the kitchen. One nurse ran out of the room in tears because Mrs. Evelyn had thrown a bowl of hot porridge at the wall. "It's too cold! You are all useless!" Mrs. Evelyn yelled. Her voice was thin and sharp. I felt a deep pity for her. She was surrounded by gold and silver, but she had no peace. Marcus tried to help his mother, but she only pushed him away. I saw his shoulders sink every time he left her room. He looked exhausted. He spent more time in the grandfather's room, sitting in the dark. I knew he was losing hope. The mansion was full of wealth, but it was empty of genuine care. One night, I walked past Mrs. Evelyn's room. The door was slightly open. I saw her lying in the middle of her king-sized bed. She looked so small and haggard. She was staring at the ceiling, and her hands were shaking on the silk sheets. She called out Chloe's name in a weak voice, but no one answered. Only the sound of the wind replied. I whispered to myself, she is realizing it now. Money can buy a beautiful bed, but it cannot buy a hand to hold in the dark. I took a deep sigh and leaned against the wall. I felt the coldness of the house in my bones. Mrs. Evelyn had spent her whole life talking about bloodlines in class. She wanted a daughter-in-law with a high status. But now, when she was truly suffering, her high-class world had abandoned her. I thought about my own life. I had no money and no family name, but I knew how to care. I knew how to stay when things got difficult. I knew that the dirty blood she hated was the only thing that had saved her husband, and now it was the only thing that could save her spirit. I stood there in the shadows for a long time. I felt a moment of silence as the clock ticked on the wall. The glamour of the Thorne family was falling apart, and underneath it all, there was only a lonely, sick woman who was terrified of being alone. I realized that the mansion was not a palace anymore. It was a golden cage. I walked back to my small room, but I couldn't sleep. I knew what was coming next. Marcus would eventually come to me. He would ask for my help, because he had nowhere else to turn. I whispered to myself, am I strong enough to return to the place where I was so deeply hurt? I looked at the silver ring the grandfather gave me. It felt warm in my hand. I knew my answer. I felt a quiet determination. I was not just a caregiver. I was a professional, and I was a human being. I would show her the power of the blood she called wrong. Marcus came to my small apartment on a rainy Tuesday evening. The rain was hitting the windows hard. When I opened the door, I saw him standing there without an umbrella. He was soaked. His hair was messy, and his expensive suit was ruined. He looked like he had not slept for a week. His eyes were red, and his face was full of pain. I felt a deep sadness seeing him like this. Sophie, please, Marcus said, his voice shaking. I am desperate. My mother, she is very sick. She has fired 3 nurses in 3 days. She screams at everyone. She refuses to eat. Nobody can handle her. I looked at him, and I felt his desperation. Part of me wanted to say no. I remembered the way his mother called me dirty blood. I remembered how she humiliated me at the dinner party. But as I looked at Marcus, I knew I could not be cruel. I am a caregiver. It is my nature to help those who are suffering, even if they have hurt me before. I will come back, Marcus, I said quietly. But I am not doing this for the Thorne family name, and I am not doing it for money. I am doing it because she is a human being in pain. When I walked back into the Thorne mansion, the air felt heavy and cold. It did not feel like a home. It felt like a museum of expensive, lonely things. I walked up the stairs to Mrs. Evelyn's room. I could hear her coughing before I even reached the door. I pushed the door open. The room was dark because the curtains were tightly closed. Mrs. Evelyn was lying in the middle of her giant bed. She looked so small and haggard, thin and pale. Her skin was like yellow paper. When she saw me, her eyes went wide with anger. You! She screamed, though her voice was weak. Did you come here to laugh at me? Did you come to see the great Evelyn Thorne on her knees? Go away! I don't want your dirty hands near me. I did not move. I did not get angry. I walked slowly to the window and pulled back the heavy curtains. The bright sunlight filled the room. Mrs. Evelyn covered her eyes and hissed. I walked to her bedside and took out my thermometer. "I am here because I am a professional caregiver," I said in a calm, steady voice. "Every other nurse has left you. Chloe is not here. Your rich friends are not here. But I am. Now, please, stay still." I felt her anger like a hot fire, but I did not let it burn me. I whispered to myself, "Be patient, Sophie. She is only a scared woman." For the next week, it was a battle. Mrs. Evelyn was the most difficult patient I had ever seen. She was bitter and mean. Every time I brought her a bowl of warm soup, she pushed it away. "This tastes like nothing," she would yell. Every time I helped her change her clothes, she would whisper insults. She called me a gold digger and said I was only there because I wanted to marry Marcus for his wealth. I took a deep sigh every time she spoke. I knew she was trying to make me quit, but I didn't quit. I stayed by her side. I cleaned her skin with soft, warm towels. I brushed her hair, gently. When her fever was high in the middle of the night, I stayed awake and held a cold cloth to her forehead. I sat in the chair next to her bed and listened to her mumble in her sleep. Sometimes, her hands were shaking from the fever, and I would hold them until she became calm. I knew she was starting to wonder why I was still there. I thought to myself, she has never known unconditional kindness. One afternoon, Chloe came to visit. She was wearing a very short, expensive skirt and high heels. She brought a large bouquet of roses, but she stayed by the door. She did not walk to the bed. She looked at Mrs. Evelyn with a look of fear and disgust. "Oh, Evelyn," Chloe said, holding a silk scarf over her nose. "The room smells like medicine. It is so depressing. I can't stay long. I have a manicure appointment in 30 minutes, and then I have a party to attend." Mrs. Evelyn looked at Chloe. Then she looked at me. I was on my knees, cleaning the floor where some water had spilled. I was wearing my simple uniform, and my hair was tied back. I was working hard. Chloe didn't even touch Mrs. Evelyn's hand. She just talked about her new car for 5 minutes, and then left. After Chloe disappeared, the room was very silent. Mrs. Evelyn stared at the closed door for a long time. Then she turned her head and watched me as I carefully prepared her pills. I felt her eyes on me. They were not full of hate anymore. They were full of confusion. I thought, she is finally seeing the difference between class and character. To make her feel better, I started to talk to her. I did not talk about the present. I talked about her father, the grandfather. I told her the stories he told me about his childhood. I told her how he used to talk about her. "Your father told me he was very proud of you," I said softly as I adjusted her pillow. "He said you were the strongest person he knew. He told me you worked so hard to keep this family together after your mother died." Mrs. Evelyn's face changed. Her tears ran down her face slowly. He said that?" she asked. Her voice was just a whisper. "Yes," I replied. "He loved you very much. He said you have a good heart, but you are sometimes too afraid to show it." I felt a quiet connection in the room. For the first time, the ice between us was melting. Mrs. Evelyn realized that I was the only person who truly knew her family. I was the only one who cared about her father's secrets and her father's love. She realized that I knew more about her heart than Chloe ever would. I whispered to myself, "The truth is more powerful than any lie." As she fell asleep that night, she didn't push my hand away. She let me hold her hand. I knew the journey was not over, but I felt a tiny spark of hope. I was the orphan with the wrong bloodline, but I was the only one giving her the love she truly needed. I knew that soon she would have to face the biggest truth of all. I sat in the dark room, watching her breathe. I realized that being a caregiver was not just about medicine. It was about healing a broken soul. I felt that I was finally doing what I was meant to do. Finally, the day came when Mrs. Evelyn was healthy enough to walk again. The doctors said she was a survivor. On her last day of recovery, I finished my work. I cleaned her room and organized her medicine for the final time. I waited for her to say something, maybe a small thank you or a nod of her head, but she remained silent. She sat by the window, looking out at the rose garden. Her face was calm, but her heart was still a wall of stone. I whispered to myself, my work here is done. I packed my small bag, took the silver ring from the grandfather, and quietly walked out of the Thorne mansion. Marcus offered to drive me home, but I shook my head. I needed to walk. I needed to breathe the air outside that house. Life in the mansion returned to normal, or at least, that is what Mrs. Evelyn thought would happen. But the house felt different now. It was empty and too quiet. One morning, Mrs. Evelyn was sitting in the large dining room. She was reading the newspaper and felt a bit thirsty. Without thinking, she called out, "Sophie, bring me my tea with less sugar, please." There was no answer. Only the ticking of the clock replied. Mrs. Evelyn stopped reading. She looked at the empty chair where I used to sit. She realized I was gone. I knew she was starting to feel the silence. I thought about how she must have felt in that big, cold room. For the first time, the Thorne mansion felt like a prison to her, not a palace. Later that day, Chloe came to visit. She was wearing a bright yellow dress and talking loudly on her phone. She sat down and immediately started complaining. "Evelyn, Marcus is so boring lately. He refuses to take me to the jewelry show. He says he is too busy with work. Can you believe it?" Mrs. Evelyn looked at Chloe. She looked at Chloe's perfect makeup and her expensive bag. Then, she remembered my hands. She remembered how my hands were warm when she was cold. She remembered how I listened to her stories for hours without complaining. Chloe was only talking about herself. She was superficial. She only cared about the surface. I felt Mrs. Evelyn's realization through the stories Marcus told me later. She looked at Chloe and saw a stranger. She looked at the empty hallway and saw the ghost of the girl she had chased away. I took a deep sigh when I heard this. Mrs. Evelyn was finally waking up. "Marcus," Mrs. Evelyn said suddenly, "take me to Sophie's house." Marcus was shocked. He didn't ask questions. He helped his mother into the car and drove to the small, crowded part of the city where I lived. My house was tiny. It was old and needed paint. It was the kind of place Mrs. Evelyn used to call dirty. When they arrived, I was busy. I was cleaning my small porch and moving some heavy boxes. I saw their expensive black car stop in front of my gate. My hands were shaking slightly as I saw Mrs. Evelyn step out. She was not wearing her diamonds. She was wearing a simple coat. She didn't scream. She didn't order me to come to the car. Instead, she did something I never expected. She stood by the gate and waited. She waited for 10 minutes while I finished my work. She watched me mop the floor and tidy my small garden. Her eyes were wide, and she looked at my life with a new kind of respect. She saw my hard work. She saw my dignity. I whispered to myself, "Is this really her?" I knew she was waiting for me to notice her. She was not a queen anymore. She was just a mother. I felt a strange mix of emotions. I thought about all the insults, but then I remembered the grandfather's words. I opened the gate and looked at her. "Sophie," she said. Her voice was not sharp. It was soft and tired. "Can we talk?" I took a deep sigh and opened the door. I felt that the world was finally turning in the right direction. The woman who hated my blood was now standing at my door, seeking the peace that only my wrong bloodline could give her. A month later, the Thorne mansion was full of light and music. It was the night of a grand celebration. Many wealthy business partners and famous families were there. The air smelled of expensive perfume and rich food. I stood in a quiet corner of the large hall. I was wearing a simple, modest dress. I felt out of place among the diamonds and the silk. I thought about the night I cried in the hospital hallway, feeling like a ghost. Today, I was still the same Sophie, but the world around me was changing. Chloe was there, of course. She looked like a queen in a sparkling red dress. She walked through the room as if she owned the floor. When she saw Mrs. Evelyn, she smiled widely. Chloe walked toward her, her high heels clicking loudly. She reached out her hand to grab Mrs. Evelyn's arm, acting like she was already the daughter-in-law of the house. I knew Chloe wanted everyone to see her power. But then, something happened that no one expected. Mrs. Evelyn gently but firmly pulled her arm away. She didn't look at Chloe. Instead, she looked across the room. She looked at me. I felt my heart stop for a second. The room became very quiet. Mrs. Evelyn walked through the crowd. Every eye was on her. She walked straight to my corner and reached out her hand. "Sophie," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Come with me." She took my hand and led me to the center of the room, under the bright lights of the crystal chandelier. I whispered to myself, "Is this really happening? Is this a dream?" Mrs. Evelyn turned to face the crowd. She looked at Chloe's father, and then at Chloe. Her face was calm, but her eyes were full of a new kind of light. "Many people think that a bloodline defines a person's value," Mrs. Evelyn said. Her voice echoed in the silent hall. "I used to be one of those people. I was wrong. I was blind." She squeezed my hand tightly. I felt a moment of peace flowing from her palm to mine. "This young woman saved my husband's life," she continued, "and when I was sick and alone, she cared for me with a heart full of gold. While others, those who call themselves noble, abandoned me, Sophie stayed. She showed me what true dignity looks like. From today, Sophie is not a caregiver in this house. She is my daughter." I felt a sharp gasp from the crowd. Chloe's face turned bright red with shock and humiliation. I thought about all the days I was called dirty blood, and tears ran down my face. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure happiness. At that exact moment, as Mrs. Evelyn held my hand high, something changed. Her thumb brushed against the old silver ring on my finger. Suddenly, she froze. Her eyes widened until I could see the white all around them. Her breath hitched, and she stopped speaking in the middle of a word. I felt her fingers tremble violently against my skin. She pulled my hand closer to her eyes, her breathing becoming fast and shallow. She looked at the ring, then at me, then back at the ring. I knew Marcus was watching us, his face full of wonder. Mrs. Evelyn's voice was shaking as she whispered, "This ring, where did you get this?" "The grandfather gave it to me," I replied softly. "He said it was a gift for my kindness." Mrs. Evelyn took a sharp, gasping breath. I saw her pupils grow large with shock. I knew this was the heirloom of her own mother-in-law, a woman who was also once treated like an outsider because she was poor. The grandfather had kept it hidden for years, waiting for someone worthy. By giving it to me, he had chosen me as the true heir of the Thorn Spirit. I whispered to myself, "The circle is finally complete." This realization made Mrs. Evelyn's words even more powerful. She wasn't just accepting me, she was healing a wound that had existed in her family for decades. She was breaking the curse of prejudice. But Chloe could not stay silent. She stepped forward, her face twisted with rage. "This is a joke!" she screamed. "You are choosing an orphan over me? She is just a gold digger. She is a nobody. She will never be one of us." I looked at Marcus. For the first time, I felt his strength. He didn't hide behind his mother. He didn't look at the floor. He stepped forward and stood right next to me. He took a deep sigh and looked Chloe straight in the eyes. "Chloe," Marcus said. His voice was polite but very strong. "Your status is in the expensive bag you carry, but Sophie's status is in her heart. It is time you learn to respect my family and my future wife." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Chloe was paralyzed with shame. Her father grabbed her arm and led her away as people started to whisper. I felt a quiet satisfaction. It was not because I wanted revenge, but because the truth was finally enough. Marcus looked at me and smiled. I felt his hand on mine, and this time, it was firm and warm. I thought about the grandfather and how he was smiling somewhere. I was the girl with the wrong bloodline, but in this mansion of gold and stone, I had found the only thing that was real. We stood there together, three people who had finally found their way home. The ice was gone. The shadows were gone. There was only the light and the promise of a new beginning. I realized that blood only carries life, but it is our actions that carry our soul. I knew then that I truly belonged. Looking back at everything, I felt a deep sense of peace. I realized that kindness is a language that even the blind can see and the deaf can hear. In the Thorn Mansion, I was treated like a shadow because I was poor, but I knew that my value did not come from a bank account. I took a deep sigh as I thought about the long struggle. Class and money are just clothes we wear. They can be taken away in a single day. However, character is the blood that defines who we truly are. It is the only thing we take with us when we leave this world. I felt that Sophie's story taught me something very important. Love and sacrifice are more powerful than any family name. I whispered to myself, never judge a person by their status. Truth always shines in the dark. I knew that being kind was my greatest strength. In our modern world, we often fall into a trap. We judge people based on their social media profiles and their expensive cars. We look at the surface and forget to look at the soul. But life is unpredictable. Today you are rich, but tomorrow you might be the one lying in a hospital bed. My advice to you is simple. Be careful about who you choose to keep close to you. Pay attention to those who stay by your side when you are at your lowest point. True friends are not those who laugh with you at parties. They are the ones who hold your hand when you are in pain. They are the ones who care for you when you have nothing to offer but your weakness. Remember, wealth is temporary, but loyalty is a rare treasure. Always value a person's character over their social status. Surround yourself with people who love you for who you are, not for what you have. This is the secret to a meaningful life. I thought about how many people forget this until it is too late. Don't be one of them. Choose heart over gold. Mrs. Evelyn finally realized that Sophie's true value was not in her family name, but in her heart. I felt so much joy when she finally called her daughter. It was a moment of pure healing for everyone. Do you believe that kindness can change even the coldest hearts? If you support Sophie and her beautiful journey, please comment yes below. We would love to hear your thoughts and stories. If this story touched your heart today, please hit the like button and subscribe to Peak English Stories. Join us for more meaningful English life lessons. Have a beautiful and blessed day.